Uh, oh, hello. Hold on. There. Paused for now. Hi. Games. Games are so very prevalent in our society today. There's You can find them everywhere. You can find them on your gaming consoles. You can find them on your tablets, on your computers, on your telephones, your smartphones. They're basically everywhere. And what with the Oculus Rift and a couple other companies, I believe, working on trying to bring virtual reality to make that a real thing. Uh, it's this is it has made a particular novel kind of a product of not only the times now, but the times that someone like me grew up in. We'll get to that in just a moment. But for now, roll the credits while I finish this level. Hello, and welcome to Book 2, Chapter 9 of You Should Be Reading. Today I'm going to be talking about Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Now, this is a book I've heard some things about in over the past year or so. I'm not sure exactly when it was released, when it was published, but it doesn't matter. I've heard things about it. I've heard lots of good reviews. Uh, I've seen the guy talking about his book on on the internet and on Atari Game Over, the documentary, which I watched on Netflix. So I thought, I'm going to pick it up and check it out. And I did. Now, I'm going to say right off the bat, that this particular book, while I did enjoy this book quite a bit. This is not the sort of book that I would go around to be reading a second time, at least not. It's not like the Robotech books, which I love dearly, and over a period of 6 or 7 years, I read the entire 21 book series at least once per year in that time period. This is not one of those books. This is a book that I may go back and read again several years down the road. I may not read it ever again. Doesn't matter. But it's a book that I'm glad that I have read. I'm glad that I did read. It was an enjoyable book. I never once felt like I was wasting my time reading it. And I have had books in the past. I'm fairly forgiving to books when it comes to what I will and won't tolerate. Uh, there are very few books that I have started to read that I've been like, no, I can't do this. And this was not one of those. This was a book I finished all the way through, and I enjoyed it. Now, that also being said, this book it doesn't do anything new. It doesn't tread any new ground, really. Not really, but it's still good. I still enjoyed it. There were several times over the course of the book that I was like going, oh no, this person is going to turn out and end up being a bad person and betraying the main character because of reasons, or this is happening here. This person seems suspicious right now, so this is probably a hint that something's going to be there's going to be a twist later on, and that didn't really happen. It didn't really pan out. Things more or less ended up playing out as you would expect in the book. Now, that's not a bad thing because Mr. Klein throws in just enough little twists and turns, just enough interesting things into the mix where it doesn't become too stale, where it doesn't become too much of how to put this. It doesn't become too formulaic to the point that it's bad. And I'll be the first person to tell anybody that formulaic is not a bad thing. A lot of L.E. Modesitt Jr.'s work, who is an author I dearly love, a lot of his work is very similar. There's very similar themes, very similar character concepts, and story progressions. David Eddings is another one. His particular fantasy series that he has, they're very formulaic. They follow a very similar path, almost all of them. But that's not a bad thing, and it's not a bad thing here either, because the main goal is the main question, I should say, that I ask myself is, am I being entertained? Am I enjoying the book that I'm reading? And if I can answer yes to that question, whether it's formulaic or not doesn't really matter. So what is Ready Player One about? Well, it's about the year 2044, and the world is pretty much a horrible place. A lot of the natural resources of Earth, has been used up. Uh, Society as a whole is generally kind of in decline, but there's some hope. There's an online virtual utopia known as Oasis that pretty much all of the world tends to use. It's used for not just entertainment, it's used for finance, it's used for education, it's used for just general communication and hanging out with people. It's made the world a smaller place because pretty much everybody's on it. And the guy that created this eccentric, reclusive multi-billionaire, because he created it all, he ends up dying and leaving as his last will and testament a riddle, a clue, the beginning of a scavenger hunt. And whoever wins the scavenger hunt, whoever finds the Easter egg that he has hidden inside Oasis, will inherit his entire fortune, the company, and basically ownership of Oasis. So Ready Player One follows a young boy, just turning 18, around that time period, named Wade Watts, and he ends up being the first to get the first part of the puzzle. What is called, because there's 3 keys they need to find, and he ends up being the first on the scoreboard, having obtained it, and it goes from there. It's a really well written book. It's the sort of book that I would like to have written, but I haven't, because this guy wrote it first. Ernest Cline, shame on you for completely stealing my thunder, which I never thought of. Anyway, it's a really good book. It's just jam-packed, filled with 1980s pop culture references and all that good stuff. Because that's where Mr. Halliday, the guy that, the eccentric multi-billionaire, he grew up in the 80s. That was his time. That was when he was a kid. And he basically, through so much, made it so intrinsic to knowing that time period in order to solve his little clues, to figure things out. So there's a ton of pop culture references, and I got most of them, which was really cool. So I enjoyed reading it. It's a good read. Little formulaic, as I said, probably not for everyone. I've heard some people say it's, this, that, and the other thing. People are allowed to have their opinions. My opinion is it's a really good book. It's really decent, and I think you should check it out at least. At least give it a shot. So today, I'm going to finish off. I'm going to leave you with a little bit of this. Ready Player One. 0000. That's how he does the chapters. Numerals. Everyone my age remembers where they were and what they were doing when they first heard about the contest. I was sitting in my hideout watching cartoons when the news bulletin broke in on my video feed, announcing that James Halliday had died during the night. I'd heard of Halliday, of course. Everyone had. He was the video game designer responsible for creating The Oasis, a massive multiplayer online game that had gradually evolved into the globally networked virtual reality most of humanity now used on a daily basis. The unprecedented success of The Oasis had made Halliday one of the wealthiest people in the world. At first, I couldn't understand why the media was making such a big deal of the billionaire's death. After all, the people of planet Earth had other concerns: the ongoing energy crisis, catastrophic climate change, widespread famine, poverty, and disease, half a dozen wars, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Normally, the news feeds didn't interrupt everyone's interactive sitcoms and soap operas unless something really major had happened, like the outbreak of some new killer virus, or another major city vanishing in a mushroom cloud. Big stuff like that. As famous as he was, Halliday's death should have warranted only a brief segment on the evening news, so the unwashed masses could shake their heads in envy when the newscasters announced the obscenely large amount of money that would be doled out to the rich man's heirs. But that was the rub. James Halliday had no heirs. He had died a 67-year-old bachelor with no living relatives and, by most accounts, without a single friend. He'd spent the last 15 years of his life in self-imposed isolation, during which time, if the rumors were to be believed, he'd gone completely insane. So the real jaw-dropping news that January morning, the news that had everyone from Toronto to Tokyo crapping in their cornflakes, concerned the contents of Halliday's last will and testament, the fate of his vast fortune. Halliday had prepared a short video message, along with instructions that it be released to the world media at the time of his death. He'd also arranged to have a copy of the video emailed to every single Oasis user that same morning. I still remember hearing the familiar electronic chime when it arrived in my inbox just a few seconds after I saw that first news bulletin. His video message was actually a meticulously constructed short film titled Anorak's Invitation. A famous eccentric, Halliday had harbored a lifelong obsession with the 1980s, the decade during which he'd been a teenager. And Anorak's Invitation was crammed with obscure 80s pop culture references, nearly all of which were lost on me the first time I viewed it. The entire video was just over 5 minutes in length, and in the days and weeks that followed, it would become the most scrutinized piece of film in history, surpassing even the Zapruder film in the amount of painstaking frame-by-frame analysis devoted to it. My entire generation would come to know every second of Halliday's message by heart. And I'm not going to go into the message. That would be spoiling the fun of reading and imagining that video happening and trying to figure out where the clues are. So I'm just going to leave you with that little bit, that little tiny snippet of Ernest Cline's Ready Player One. Because this week, this is the book that you should be reading. And I'll see you next time.